Guys, it's me, Alex. I'm excited to record another solo podcast for Wild and Wise. This one is personal, as they all are. I have kind of been really diving more into my own identity, reflecting on being almost 40, being a mom, being an owner of multiple businesses, and more importantly, just sharing more of my truth and my story, one of which is my identity as a queer woman. I think that my close friends know that I identify as bisexual and that I feel, very certain in my queerness. But it's something I kind of want to unpack more for people that either are curious about themselves and their own queerness, who maybe don't understand the queer world. And there's a variety of experiences that this might be a fit to discuss. And there's so many different elements to it. It's such a complex topic. So I'm only going to speak to my own and the experiences that I've had with the LGBT community, the ways that they've impacted my life, and my own queer story, which I've never really told. I remember being out in my 20s, maybe even like 19, 20 years old, dancing with a friend of mine. It was like our little, go to each week. We'd go to Bar Basic in East Village and we would dance. And I just remember thinking one time, like, what would it be like to, you know, flirt with a girl? What would it be like to approach a girl? I don't even know how. And I think, just in such a patriarchal, hetero society that we live in, I had always been sort of informed by the male gaze. I was tall from a young age and talked to my mom a lot about the way men looked at me and approached me, and I had never really been approached by a woman. I didn't have a lot of queer people in my life growing up, and so it wasn't really talked about. It was always an open topic in my home if we wanted to talk about it, but it wasn't something that was in my life enough to explore further. And I never explored it until my time in Chicago. And when I moved to Chicago, I was 25 and pretty quickly met my best friend in the whole world, Jackie Trezzo, my girl. And she had told me that she was bi, and I asked her so many questions about it. I was very curious about, her interactions with women and how it came about and what it was like, and how it's different from being with men versus women, whether it's dating or in intimate moments. And I just appreciate that she was such an open book. I described a lot about what I thought I was looking for. And if you know me well, you know that I've had very few relationships. I have really, not that it's an excuse, but focused very much on my career. I think I used to think that if I had somebody waiting for me after work to go do fun things, I wouldn't work as hard. So I decided to run with that narrative. Maybe that was a narrative that was based in a bit of fear of commitment or fear of vulnerability. And I really had one great love in high school into college who set the tone for so much greatness. He was a being who treated me with so much respect and was romantic and kind and very loving. Through college, I never had a boyfriend or girlfriend or dated anybody. Then post college, came back to San Diego, didn't have any serious relationships, and then moved to Chicago and dated somebody on and off in a sort of toxic situation. And so, in my mid to late 20s, most of my friends had never really seen me with anybody, and it didn't really bother me. So here's the story of how I started to date somebody and really explore my queerness. At the time, I worked for a restaurant group and they were opening their brand new restaurant. So Jackie and I went over to the opening that they had, the opening party. And our server came over and introduced herself. And when she walked away, Jackie said, "That could be your girl." And I'd never really pictured what that could look like, but this woman was beautiful, masculine, best jawline I've ever seen. And soon after, I started to work at that restaurant and work with that woman. And we talked a lot, spent a lot of time together. And, we'd go for drinks after work and it was friendly. I was very nervous and wanted to better understand myself in this situation, what this would be like. And eventually I would also have to address my own homophobia in what it meant to be with a woman and how that made me feel, and this, social projections that I was feeling myself, where I thought I was very open. And then once the time came for us to start dating, I felt very nervous of what people would think. If we were to hold hands in public, what would that look like? All these fears came up for me. What's interesting is the way that it went from going and getting cocktails after work to starting to spend more time together romantically was that I was a finalist to be on a reality show where at the end I would probably end up being engaged, if not married, to the man that was on the show. It was a show where there was 3 men and 3 matchmakers. And basically the goal was for the matchmaker to do the best job by finding her person, her guy's best match. And was hanging out with this woman from work. We'll call her Maddie. And I was telling her, there's a lot of flirtation. And I was telling her that I was about to be on the show. And she basically point blank said, before you go on the show to marry a man, are you sure you don't want to make certain that you don't want to be with women? And I loved the boldness. I am quite bold myself. And I liked the way that she pursued me. And I liked the time she spent with me and the way that she made it a priority to be with me after work. And so we kind of started an affair. And I quickly was so overcome with fear, mostly fear of the vulnerability. It is much different to date a woman than it is to date a man when it comes to being vulnerable. I think I could probably get away with dating a man for quite a long time in my 20s and not have to be vulnerable, maybe even in my 30s. It's rare to find a man who is so emotionally intelligent that he pushes you to really open up and to really be vulnerable. So when I was dating her, it was very instant that the vulnerability rose up inside of me. It felt very overwhelming. I could feel fear of every kind through my body. I remember going to a concert. She picked me up and I was so mean. I said, just so you know, this is not a date. We're just friends. And it was coming from a place of like, I am so afraid of falling in love or discovering that I'm actually a lesbian, that I want to push you away as much as I can. And sure enough, that worked. And I remember kind of not hearing from her after treating her in ways that she didn't deserve. And I didn't see her again for a really long time. And I proceeded to date other people, work my way up, start a business, all these things until one day I had this baby boy named Henry, and I got a text message from Maddie that said, hey, I'm back in Chicago. I heard you had a baby. I got a little gift. I hope you don't mind. I'd love to stop by and bring it to you. And I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't seen Maddie in so long. How kind. Absolutely, come on by. And she came by and wouldn't look me in the eyes. And I didn't know why. And I thought it was very odd. So I asked her later, why wouldn't you look me in the eyes? And she said, it's just too much heartbreak. And so we ended up talking more, spending more time together. It was very casual until one day we were at brunch and she was holding Henry, and I realized that I had fallen in love with her. She was in a relationship and I was overwhelmed with, this time not fear, certainty. I was overwhelmed with how certain I was that I was absolutely head over heels in love with her. And we didn't even need to talk about it. She came to my house the next morning very early, knocking on my door, and I opened the door. I had cried all night. I had called my mom and I said, Mom, I'm gay. I've fallen in love with Maddie. I called my best friend Alden at the time and I said, oh my gosh, I'm so in love with Maddie. And it was this just surrender of, this is maybe why I've never found the right man. Maybe all along I had a lot more queerness in me than I was willing to explore. And Maddie was at my front door and said, I'm in love with you. I know you're in love with me, and I'm no longer in my relationship. We broke up last night because I know that you and I need to be together. And I had no question about it. I felt the exact same way. The timing was interesting. I was a new mom single mom, felt very almost like that was the answer. Like I was really feeling like, oh my gosh, this whole time this makes perfect sense. And we proceeded to just have the most incredible time with friends. The love felt so vast, and lo and behold, I was getting ready to move back to San Diego. So here I was out of the closet at the age of 31 and finally felt like I had found my person. And I was about to move across the country for the sake of my son, for the sake of my mental health, and to continue on building my brand in California. And when I moved out, she came to visit. And as we talked more, she let me know, and she had let me know for a while that she, had come out to me as trans and that she felt like she was in the wrong body, and that by the time I moved out, she had started taking testosterone, which made a big impact on the way that she approached things. And things quickly changed. I was looking for certainty, stability. I was a mother, I owned a business, and I don't mean to keep throwing those two things around, but they are a tremendously deep and incredible amount of responsibility. And I needed a partner that felt really stable and very certain. And Maddie was going through one of the toughest experiences that a human could ever go through. And at the same time, glorious and liberating, which is coming out as trans and then going through the transition. And there's so much political unrest around the topic of trans people. Having been deeply and seriously in love with somebody who came out as trans, their struggle was so deep and so dark and so hard, from healthcare to their work environment to pronouns. And while I would think I've seen a lot of people kind of approach those things as very trivial, when it's someone you love's life, whether it's your child, your partner, your sister, your friend, it is not something that anybody who is going through a transition takes lightly. It's not a quick decision. It's not a choice. It is something that they live with day and night, and that plagues them day and night. And this person that I loved deeply was incredibly plagued with guilt, with shame, with truth, with a desire to be in the body that they were meant to be in. And it is something that was incredibly hard to watch, because it was something that I wish we had had more of a foundation under us for me to support them through that. But I barely had any foundation under me. I was moving across the country. I had like no money. Our company was falling apart, and I wasn't in the place to be a supportive partner through that process, nor was our relationship. It was still so new. Even though we had known each other for many years, the relationship itself, the love that we had started to build was so fresh. And so I don't really know how it ended, but it was over. And it was probably the biggest heartbreak I've ever had in my entire life. It was confusing. I felt, like I had fallen in love with a woman, and this woman was then trans, and I saw him one time after he transitioned, and I could tell that he felt like he was in the right body, and for that I felt really happy for him. But it was just a very wild experience for my own self to dive into the depths of understanding my own queerness, only to really face their queerness and their transition and their gender reflections. But it's what I love the most about my time in Chicago was the depth for which I was able to be around and spend time with queer people of every single walk. And I hadn't known anybody trans when I was in high school growing up in Coronado. I knew a few gay people. In college, I knew maybe a few gay people as well, one of which is still a very, very dear friend. But it really wasn't until I got to Chicago that I got to see what it meant to be queer in community, in the streets, in marching for human rights, in the representation, in the vocality, the way that they spoke about justice for all. It changed my entire life. And I know I've said this before, but I feel like living in Chicago cut my eyelids open and peeled them back to a world I had never known or seen, but had always existed. And sometimes I wish the world would understand that queer people exist, trans people exist. That's not going to change with laws. It's not going to change with anything. And if we can take the time to peel our eyes back to see the world around us, it is beautiful and free and vulnerable and open. And the queer community as a whole possesses qualities that are spiritual. I was just at a trans march just a few weeks ago, Father's Day, actually. And there were so many beautiful speakers. There was a man in the military that was speaking out about trans rights. There was somebody from a youth program who had transitioned and just talked about the ways in which, with long hair and anything feminine, felt completely crawling out of their skin. And now, with the ability to cut their hair and be around more trans people, feel so much more aligned, feel so much more mentally stable and well, that their mental health had taken such a deep dive until they were exposed to the trans community and was able to see themselves in others. And as I was listening to each of the speakers, I realized that so much of what this community was fighting for, talking about, and calling for, generosity, transformation, community, support, it's all things that really ironically originate in spiritual practices like Christianity and Buddhism. And it really had me thinking deeply about the connection between queerness and spiritual leaders. And it's so interesting. I used to be really Christian, and I call it surfer Christian. You know, we grew up in a beach town. We loved God. You know, we loved the country. We were around the military in Coronado, and those things kind of all felt like they went hand in hand. There was never any narrative around not accepting certain people. There was never a narrative around anything like that. It felt just full of love. And I remember living in Chicago. It was my first Pride in Chicago. I was so excited. I had this cute apartment in Lakeview, Lincoln Park, with my dear friend Katie, and we had these bay windows that, you know, went out. And we were going to have a bunch of our friends over, many of whom were queer. And we were going to go to our first Pride parade. And I had been to other Pride parades in the past in San Diego and Palm Springs, but this was a big deal. This was Chicago Pride. And I remember getting ready and being so excited, and we were making punches and bites and getting ready, getting the house ready. And I heard this like chanting, and I'm so sorry, bear with me. I can never tell the story without crying. But I looked out the window and I saw people with signs, and I looked closer to see what they said. And you could tell they were in opposition of what the parade was. And again, I hadn't been to, at that point, I had just moved to Chicago. I had not been to a lot of human rights marches or seen hatred and opposition, right? And I looked closer and it said, "God hates fags." It was like a very confusing moment for me because I was 25 and I had probably spent the ages of 15 to 19 deeply committed and close to God. And even when I veered away from going to church, I always felt deeply connected to God. And while maybe religion was the thing that I wasn't as close to, I was always deeply close to something greater than myself. So to see a sign with hatred towards the very people that I was so excited to have over, what I was so excited to celebrate with, I decided then and there to walk away from ever being connected to the word Christian. I took that cloak off for the rest of my life in that moment, because I could never stand with an institution that would put people down who have already been through so much to be liberated and free. And so it was so interesting going to this trans march because the way they spoke was about going down to the border and helping their brothers and sisters. It was about lifting each other up. It was about making sure everybody feels included. It was about making space for people who are different than you. And that's what I felt connected to when I found myself calling myself a Christian, was how much I loved other human beings, how much I wanted to offer a safe space of people to feel unconditionally loved, to be generous with my time towards others, to allow anyone at any point in their life, no matter where they were, to feel safe in my presence. And that has evolved with the church so much, and it is poured into politics and Christian nationalism. And I won't go deeply, but to me, being with chosen family, with queer friends, is church. A chosen family, for those who don't know, is something that is beautiful and also a form of survival in many circles, where those who come out as queer to their parents often lose their families, and therefore they have a chosen family through the friends and community that surrounds them. I've been lucky enough to have an incredible family and also an incredible chosen family, a family that is chosen based off of shared values, shared trust, shared connectivity, creativity, and care. And I also think of my sister Juliana, who is queer and is such a beautiful example of the emotional intellectualism that comes when one is exploring all parts of themselves in their queerness. She not only has her master's and works for an incredible institution in education in San Francisco around music, but she's traveled the world teaching. She has given herself so freely to her own community in San Francisco, whether it's helping others, supporting friends, seeking out the arts. She's just a beautiful example of somebody who came out college age and embraced her queerness in a way that freed her in so many levels, that I continue to see her every single time I see her as a more free version of herself. And I think it's something that everyone, especially non-queer people, could learn so much from if they just took a step back and really took in the beauty, the queer community in America. That is bravery, transcendence, justice, liberation, freedom, clarity, complexity. There's so many layers to this community that I feel so incredibly connected to. And while my journey in my own queerness is my own, what's more important to me than my own story is the story of the community of queer people. And while Pride Month is now officially over as I'm recording this, San Diego celebrates Pride in July. I was actually just reading a post from a council member, Sean Elo Rivera, about the reason that San Diego does Pride in July, unlike most other major metropolitan cities, is because so many resources were going towards those cities that San Diego wasn't really able to deliver in that month. And so in an effort to gather more resources to be able to really put something special on, they officially moved the month to July. And I didn't know that until I just saw it, and I thought that was really beautiful. There's so much going on in the world, and this is really my Pride Month post. This is my queer story. This is my plea to the world to reassess what it is that makes them so uncomfortable about queerness, because whether it's some of my best friends, my sister, myself, it is one of the most beautiful experiences to have people in your life who are queer. There's a complexity of joy and grief, of celebration and struggle, of visibility and fear. And I think it's something that many people might take for granted, that walking down the street, you might not feel fear, but if you're holding hands with somebody of the same gender, or your nails are painted and you're male, or fill in the blank on some type of beautiful expression of love, that you are putting your life in danger. And I just think, why would we ever want anybody who is full of freedom and expression of themselves, who has dug deeply within themselves, struggled in the complexity of themselves, and has pulled out this beautiful butterfly of a human being within themselves, why would we ever make that person feel anything other than celebrated? So for me, being an ally means not just walking with my queer friends, my queer chosen family. It's fighting for, it's putting my money where my mouth is. It's donating to a number of causes, whether it's the Human Rights Coalition or the center here in San Diego that provide an incredible amount of resources for the queer community, from queer vets to queer teens to homeless youth to those experiencing transitionary times. And so I just want to implore everyone, and I hope what they take away, aside from me being a crybaby, because it touches my heart in a way that I can't really totally describe. Therefore, my heart just begins to make me cry. My heart is so full for this community. It will always be. It will always be a main focus of my life to connect with, to support, both in showing up physically with my body in marches, in rallies, showing up with my bank account, supporting, donating, using the power that I do have in my own privilege to highlight queer voices. I've been able to have projects where I was able to work with some of the most iconic queer people in San Diego, and what a gift that was. To this day, it's one of the most proud projects I've ever been able to produce, was that, to create spaces where queer people are not only accepted but feel safe. In things like Drag Queen Story Hour, which I was the founding chapter member of here in San Diego. Being able to start that and allow children to see someone expressing themselves through makeup and singing and who's different. I think sometimes people really misunderstand Drag Queen Story Hour for kids. It's not about bringing adult content in front of kids. Of course, nobody is trying to do that. It's about allowing children to see a wide range of human beings in an environment that feels childlike, like reading a book, and having them ask questions and realizing that somebody that may look totally different than you is also somebody that can be really special and really inspiring. And that is the goal of Drag Queen Story Hour. And while I'm not as involved as I used to be, there's an amazing woman named Amanda who's now running the program. I feel really proud of myself that I was able to bring that to San Diego and to invite such an array of families to come through and enjoy that experience. And it's also been really incredible to see the depth of hate. You know, we had one of our events at the Children's Museum. God bless the San Diego Children's Museum for hosting us. And we got so much backlash that we had to get the FBI involved. And so I don't say that for dramatics. I say that in the sense that that is how much hatred is out there if you don't know. That is why people who fight for queer, gay, and LGBT rights fight so hard. It's not about the trivial things that one of our political parties may make it about. It's a true fight for a livelihood and a safety for their lives. And I've not experienced it firsthand in the way of experiencing it against me, the way that I know many, many others have. But I have seen it firsthand with my eyes, whether it's a sign outside my door that expresses hatred or the anger of a proud boy across the street who will do anything to ensure that we're not reading books to kids. So I hope you walk away with a fresher understanding of me, a little bit about why I'm wildly in love with my queer community, the wisdom that I've been able to take from my relationships, the wisdom I've been able to gain from my experience as a queer person and in queer community. And most of all, I hope you listen to some of the other podcasts with some of the most incredible queer people that I've ever met, from my interview with Kristen Kaza, who's out in Chicago, to Jordan Daniels here in San Diego, who is an absolute icon of a human being, not only for the vast work that he has done, but for the way he shows up for his community. So thank you for listening to this very vulnerable, emotional podcast. It feels really good to talk about. I hope that you will think more about how you can become an ally in this community that needs every voice they can get in with an administration that is trying to strip those rights away. It's very real for these friends, many of whom have families and children. It's very scary, and I don't mean to put fear out there. I hope there is a deep undertone of love through this message, but at the same time, it's time to step up and get your wallets out and march and make your voice heard. Thank you.